Feared Gunslinger rescued an 18-year-old girl from a cruel household. What happened next changed everything. The wind in Hollow Bend didn't howl, it whispered. It moved through brittle sage and crumbling fences like it was trying not to wake the dead. Dust hung in the air not as a storm, but a veil, soft and unshakable, catching sunlight and memory in equal parts. Out past the churchyard, where weeds had begun to overtake the stones, there stood a house whose bones creaked even when the air was still. And in that house lived a girl named Etta Hollow, who no longer remembered the sound of someone saying her name kindly. She was 18 by numbers, but time is different when it's spent in silence. Her back knew the weight of buckets, her hands the sting of cold water drawn before sunrise. She moved like someone who had learned how to stay invisible without ever vanishing. Her dresses were mended more often than they were washed, and the only softness she owned was the old green ribbon her mother once tied in her hair. That mother had passed 2 winters ago, her chest too hollow, and her hope too small to survive the coughing. Since then, Etta had been alone in the house with Graham Kellier, a man whose voice was louder than his presence deserved to be. He smelled like rotting barley and old bitterness, a scent that lingered long after he left a room. He was not her kin, not truly, but he claimed her with a grip on her arm and the title of guardian, though he guarded nothing but the bottom of his jug. Most days she stayed quiet. Not because she had nothing to say, but because nothing she said would matter. And yet, in the folds of solitude, she found her own way to speak. Torn pieces of feed sacks became paper. A stub of charcoal from the stove became a pen. Her words were small and secret, poems written to the wind, prayers to a god she wasn't sure listened anymore. She'd hide them under the floorboards, between the beams, beneath loose stones. The house had more of her soul buried inside it than the town ever would. In Hollow Bend, people didn't ask questions they didn't want answers to. The townsfolk knew the girl with the bruises. They saw her sleeve pulled too low on a hot day, or the limp in her step when she walked back from the well. But they turned their eyes. They muttered behind closed shutters. Because Graham Kellier was a loud man, and loud men made trouble when confronted. And Etta Hollow was just a girl. No one of consequence. Just another shadow in a town full of fading things. Henry Mott, the rancher's son, was one of the few who spoke to her. His smile was all teeth and easy charm, but it never reached his eyes. He'd bring her peaches from a mercantile and say he was being neighborly, but his words leaned too close, and his hands lingered too long. When she declined his invitation to Sunday supper, twice, he didn't take it kindly. By the next week, folks were whispering that she thought herself too good for honest men. By the next month, no one looked her in the eye. Then one evening, the dust shifted. Something new rode in with the wind. He came just as the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the town in the colors of old blood and faded gold. A figure atop a black horse, moving slow like he had nowhere urgent to be, and no one brave enough to stop him. He wore a duster that had seen too many roads, and boots coated in the kind of mud no local trail could claim. His hat stayed low, his shadow long. Folks paused mid-step. Words caught in throats. Even the sheriff, leaning against the saloon's post, straightened. They say he was a gunslinger. Some called him the devil's shot. Others whispered creed, like a warning half-remembered from a dream. Etta didn't see him that first day. She was scrubbing blood from her sleeve in the creek behind the house, her reflection trembling in the current. The bruises on her ribs ached like the echo of something unspoken. Graham had been especially cruel that morning. She'd spilled the grain, her fingers stiff from the cold, and he'd taught her a lesson with the back of his belt. The welts still rose like questions unanswered. That night, the town talked in hushed voices. The man had said little, just paid for a room at the inn, left coin that gleamed silver, and asked for no trouble. Which, of course, meant he carried it in his shadow. The next day, Etta saw him. She was out by the hen house, gathering eggs in her apron, when the sound of hooves stirred the dust. He rode up to the fence, didn't dismount, just sat there like part of the horizon. His eyes, when they met hers, were dark, not cruel, not kind, but watchful. Like he saw things most folks couldn't. He didn't speak, didn't tip his hat. He just nodded once and passed on. Still, her heart beat harder than it had in months. That night, Graham came home drunker than usual, muttering about strangers thinking they own the sky. He didn't like being reminded he was small. And when Etta tried to take the bottle from his hand before it broke something, he struck her hard enough to split her lip. She didn't cry. She just turned her face toward the firelight and breathed, slow and steady, until the spinning stopped. 3 nights later, the wind shifted again. It was late. The town was sleeping. Owls perched like shadows in the trees, and coyotes called to each other from the hills. And somewhere in the quiet before dawn, there were 3 sharp cracks, gunshots that faded into the silence like pebbles dropped into a well. When the sun rose, Graham Kelliher was gone. No one spoke of what happened. The sheriff said he must have run off, left his boots and coat behind. No sign of struggle, no blood in the yard. Just silence thick and strange. Folks didn't question it. They never had. But at the Hollow House, something had changed. Etta stepped out onto the porch that morning with bare feet and a wool shawl around her shoulders. She looked up at the sky, as if unsure whether it would still hold her. And there, sitting on the edge of the steps, was the stranger. He held a tin cup in his hands. Steam rose into the air, catching in the early morning chill. She didn't ask what he'd done. He didn't offer to explain. They just sat there a while, letting the wind braid their silence into something almost warm. And when she finally spoke, it was barely more than breath. "Are you staying?" He looked out across the horizon, where the sun bled into the hills. "That depends." "On what?" He met her eyes then. "On whether you want me to." Etta didn't answer. She just sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his coat, and laid her head gently against her own knees. Not touching, not needing to, because something unspoken had passed between them. Something as small as safety and as vast as hope. And for the first time in years, the morning didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something beginning. The days that followed passed like drifting ash, slow, weightless, and quiet. No one asked where Graham Kelliher had gone. Not the sheriff, not the preacher, not even Henry Mott. The man had been more burden than neighbor, and in towns like Hollow Bend, folks didn't mourn burdens once they slipped the rope. Etta didn't say the name, didn't search the woods, didn't cry. She simply rose with the light and swept the porch, her hair loose for the first time in years, her face carrying the kind of stillness that came after fire. The stranger stayed. Not in her house, not close enough to cause talk, but not far either. He claimed a quiet place near the tree line, where the cottonwoods whispered over a lean-to that didn't look like it belonged, yet somehow didn't offend the land. He built no fence, raised no smoke. Just came and went like wind across wheat. His name, she learned days later, was Silas Creed. It came not from his lips, but from the healer, Miss Birdie, who came by with a basket of dried rosemary and willow bark. "That man," she said, squinting toward the trees. "That's Silas Creed. Fought for no side but his own. They say he once shot a lawman through the hand for laying it on a widow's thigh." Etta didn't respond, but something in her chest stirred, an unfamiliar thing that felt like belief. Not in the man, in the possibility. She watched him sometimes from the kitchen window. He moved with care, like he didn't want to wake the ground beneath him. He didn't strut, didn't smoke, just carved long pieces of wood down to nothing, letting shavings curl at his feet. On the 6th morning, he left a basket by her steps, 3 apples, a tin of peaches, and a bar of soap that smelled faintly of pine. She left the peaches untouched for days. By the 10th morning, the fence behind the house had been repaired. No footprints, no hammer left behind. Just mended boards where rot had been. And that evening, as the sky turned lavender with dusk, Etta took a cup of coffee and walked to the edge of the field. She found him sitting beneath a tree, oiling the worn iron of his revolver. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. But after a time, she asked the question that had lived in her bones since the night the shots echoed through the hills. "Did you kill him?" His eyes didn't shift. "No." Her voice was quieter now. "But you didn't stop it either." He looked at her then, full and slow. There was no apology in his face. Only a softness that wasn't weakness, the kind found in men who'd known what it cost to act too late. "I gave him a choice," he said. "He didn't take it." Etta nodded. Not because she understood, but because something inside her trusted the way he said it. Like it wasn't for show. Like it wasn't a performance. Silas Creed didn't flinch. Not at bullets. Not at silence. Not even at her. The town noticed. Henry Mott especially. He came by the homestead 3 days later, saddle high. Hat tipped just wrong. Said he was checking in, seeing if she needed anything. The glint in his, "I said otherwise." She stood firm in the doorway, not stepping out, not stepping back. Her lip healed now, her spine straighter than he remembered. He squinted past her. "That him out there?" Etta didn't answer. "You know, folks talk. Say he's dangerous." She met his gaze, steady and soft. "So were you." When I said no, the smirk fell from his face like a coin slipping through cracked fingers. He turned his horse and rode off without a word, dust rising behind him like a trail of heat. Etta closed the door gently and let herself breathe. That night, Silas didn't speak, but his eyes carried the question. She only shrugged. Men like him don't leave room for women to breathe. They fill the space, then blame you when it breaks. He nodded once slowly, as if that sentence had carved something open in him too. It was the next day he taught her to shoot. Not with urgency, not with adrenaline. Just a slow afternoon, with tin cans and distance. His hands never touched her. He laid the revolver down on a folded cloth, showed her how to hold it steady, how to breathe not just through fear, but around it. Her fingers trembled on the first try. By the fifth, the gun flew off the fence post, and she let out a laugh so small it almost vanished before it reached the trees. He smiled, just barely. "You got good bones for standing still," he said. She shook her head, but her lips curved. "And you got good bones for disappearing." That night, for the first time in her memory, she left a candle burning in the kitchen. Just because she could. The town didn't speak to her anymore, not directly. They watched, whispered, "There goes the girl what took in the outlaw. There goes the orphan with blood on her porch and a devil at her fence line." But Etta didn't flinch either. She walked to the well with her head high. She traded eggs at the mercantile without apology. The change wasn't loud, but it was certain. It sat beneath her skin like a lantern newly lit. And still Silas stayed. One evening, thunder rolled in from the west. The sky bloomed dark and wild, clouds curling like smoke over the mountains. Silas knocked once on her door, held out a rough-cut piece of oilcloth. "Storm will pull the roof off if you don't wait it." She took it with quiet thanks, draped it over the leaks before the rain came. It did, hard and fast. The kind of rain that shook the memory loose from dry boards. She sat by the fire, watching shadows stretch across the floor, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. When she opened the door to check the field, she found him again. Sitting on the porch steps like before, wet to the bone, steam rising from his shoulders. "You could have stayed in your camp," she said. He looked out toward the storm. "Some things ain't meant to be weathered alone." She sat beside him, close enough their shoulders brushed. No words passed for a long while, just breath and thunder. And then she said, quiet as glass, "He used to beat me worse when it rained. Said the noise made it easier for me to scream." Silas didn't reach for her, didn't flinch, didn't offer sympathy like a bandage. He just stayed, present and listening and real. It was the first time in her life silence had ever felt like protection. When the rain faded, she stood and reached down. "Come in. You're soaked through." He rose, followed her in, left his boots by the door. They shared bread and honey in the warmth. Neither asked what came next. But the way their eyes met across the candlelight said it all. Something had shifted, not in fear, not in need, but in the slow, sacred way people begin to rebuild what the world tried to take. Winter didn't announce itself in Hallow Bend. It crept in slow, tucked behind the evening wind, beneath the eaves, under blankets that no longer felt enough. Frost curled along the glass in ghostly shapes, and the earth turned hard and unyielding. What once was golden with wheat and dust lay bare and silvered. Life shrank back to the fire, to the stove, to the quiet comfort of things that didn't leave. Etta had never known winter without fear. The cold had always meant tighter fists, longer nights, fewer rations, and crueler silence. But this winter was different. Still hard, still biting, but softened at the edges by the quiet presence of a man who asked for nothing, not even gratitude. Silas Creed didn't cross the line. She didn't invite him across. He came in when asked. He left when dismissed. His boots always found the porch first, as if waiting for permission. The fire burned longer when he was near. Not because he fed it, though he did, but because she began to want warmth. Not just survival. Comfort. That was new. That was strange. That was terrifying. She caught herself watching him too long. Not with the eyes of a girl who'd never known men, but with the caution of a woman who'd only known the wrong ones. She watched the way he moved without sound. The way he handled things, tools, animals, even her, with reverence, like everything held memory and deserved care. There were stories in his eyes, old and quiet. And pain he didn't parade like a badge, but bore like a scar meant for no one to see. Sometimes he told her things in the way men who don't know how to unburden themselves do, sideways and slow, disguised as passing thoughts. "Took a bullet once in Arkansas," he said one evening, fingers resting on the handle of a kettle. Didn't stop bleeding for 2 days. Wasn't the pain that near did me in. Was the quiet. Couldn't hear birds for near a week. Made the world feel already dead. She listened always. And when she responded, it was never with questions. Just the kind of silence that said me too, though her wounds had come from fists, not steel. Sometimes, when the cold was sharpest, she let herself drift toward him, closer than before. Her chair nearer to his. Her hands brushing the edge of his sleeve when passing the cup. She let her voice soften in his presence, not out of submission but choice. Because he gave her space to be unguarded. And in that space, something began to grow. Small and slow, like green under snow. They never named it. Love would have been too quick a word. Too bright. Too loud. What they shared was quieter. Deeper. Like water wearing through rock. The town still watched. Still whispered. But their words had turned, no longer threats, just suspicions. She's got him tamed, some said. Or he's just waiting for the right moment to leave, said others. But he didn't. Even when offered a job by a passing trader. Even when supplies ran low and the old saloon posted signs for hired hands. He stayed. Fixed things that weren't his. Mended saddles. Carried firewood. Sat with her on days when her hands refused to stop shaking, when old memory rose with the wind. It was on one such day, late January, the sky hung thick with ash-colored clouds, that she found him outside, tying up the broken barn door with wire. Her breath came in white bursts as she approached. "You're not bound to this place, you know," she said. He didn't look at her. "I ain't bound to place," he said. "I stay for people." Etta didn't reply. But that night, she lit a second candle for the first time. One on the table. One in the window. The snow fell hard that week, blanketing everything in silence. The world hushed beneath its weight, and for a moment, time felt suspended. Etta sat at the table, fingers curled around a mug. Silas carved wood as always, shaping it with patience and purpose. She watched the curls fall and asked, "What are you making?" He held it up. "A sparrow. Not finished yet." "Why a bird?" He shrugged, eyes still on the grain. "Birds don't think the sky's a risk. Just looks like home." She stared at the half-carved shape, small and strong. "What about the ones with broken wings?" His hands paused. Then, "Sometimes broken don't mean grounded. Just means you need time. And someone to wait while you heal." She didn't cry, but her voice shook as she said, "I never asked you to wait." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." He left the bird unfinished that night, setting it beside her mug. Its beak tilted slightly, as if listening. She touched it once briefly, as if afraid too much contact might break it. That night, sleep came easier. Not like a storm, but like a lullaby. When she woke the next morning, the bird had wings. Carved and detailed. Fragile but lifted. February brought rumors. Henry might have been seen riding with men who wore bandanas too tight, pistols too clean. The sheriff turned his eyes away. Folks in town felt the shift. A kind of quiet danger. No one said it outright, but the fear crept in like mold behind wallpaper. Etta heard it in whispers at the mercantile. Saw it in the glances that lingered too long. She mentioned it to Silas over stew. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Men like Mott think fear is a tax you owe for peace. You think he'll come here? I think he's angry he lost something he never owned." Etta's hands tightened around the spoon. "If he does." Silas's voice was low and steady. "Then I don't let him take it back." He didn't say you. Didn't claim her like a possession. He said it, as if what had grown between them was shared. Precious. Worth defending. That night, he didn't leave the porch. Just sat there, gun across his lap, coat wrapped close, watching the road. Etta didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't used to feeling safe. By morning, he was still there. Eyes sharp. Posture calm. Snow on his shoulders. She brought him a cup of coffee, steaming hot, and wrapped a blanket around his back before sitting beside him. "You ever miss the road?" "Sometimes," he said, "but not the running." "And here?" He looked at her. "Here feels like rest." Her breath caught, soft and sudden. "Me too." The road would come. She knew that. Trouble had a long memory and a short temper. But in that moment on that porch, wrapped in cold and quiet and the slow-burning fire of something like love, Etta believed for the first time that not all stories ended in flight. Some ended in home. And some, if you were lucky, ended in becoming. The wind changed before the town did. It always did. Came down from the north in long, sighing currents, rattling door hinges and stirring up the dry bones of memory buried beneath old timbers. The horses felt it first, jittery and breath-fogged. Then the dogs. Then the people. Hallow Bend had lived too long with silence not to notice the difference when it cracked. Trouble wasn't loud when it returned. It didn't ride in with a storm. It seeped like thaw beneath snow. Slow. Certain. Etta was trimming the last of the winter herbs when she saw them, 3 silhouettes at the edge of the road, framed like shadows on the snow. Still as fence posts, but sharp around the edges. Like things carved by a hand that didn't care for grace. She didn't move, didn't call for Silas. Just watched. She already knew who they were. Henry Mutt always wore his cruelty like a badge. You could see it in the tilt of his head, the looseness in his jaw. A man used to being feared. The men beside him didn't matter. They weren't the kind to have names and stories, just the kind to leave blood behind. Silas stepped onto the porch without a sound. No panic in his movement. Just quiet recognition, as though he, too, had been expecting this winter to end in fire. They stood together, not touching, but tethered by something stronger than hand or word. "You want to go inside?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want to see this through." So they stood, wind at their backs, snow swirling low like smoke. Henry didn't call out. He didn't have to. He walked forward, boots crunching like bones beneath him, and the others flanked him in silence. "Ain't much of a hiding place you found here, Creed," Henry said, voice soaked in the kind of laughter that meant harm. Silas didn't answer. He didn't blink. Henry's eyes slid toward Etta, slow and dragging. "You miss me, girl?" Her mouth twitched. Not with fear, but with the effort of holding back all the words she'd once swallowed to survive. "I buried what you gave me," she said. "Let the snow take it." He smirked. "You think you're free? Think this town will keep you safe? This place don't care about you. Never did." She didn't flinch. "I ain't asking it to. I've got someone who does." Henry laughed at that, a sharp, joyless sound. Then he looked at Silas. "You really think she's worth dying for?" Silas tilted his head, as if the question was small. "No, I think she's worth living for. But if dying's the cost, I'll pay it." The silence that followed was deep, heavy. Even the wind paused. Then, like a match struck in dry air, it ignited. Henry moved first, pulling iron like the past pulling chains. But Silas was already there, already shifting, already stepping into the space between breath and bullet. The first shot cracked the hill like thunder. The second missed. Etta didn't scream. She moved, not away, but forward, toward Silas, toward the flash and the sound and the heat. It didn't last long. Violence never does. It just leaves echoes that stretch farther than time should allow. One of Henry's men went down in the snow, gun skittering into the brush. The second fled. Henry stood bleeding from the shoulder, pistol still raised, face twisted not in pain, but disbelief. Like he'd been promised he could never lose. He took aim again, but the gun never fired. Etta stood in front of him now, between him and Silas. Her hand didn't shake. Her eyes didn't waver. "You taught me fear, Henry. But you also taught me what it means to survive. You don't get to teach me anything else." She didn't have a weapon, but her words landed sharper than bullets. Henry dropped the gun, not for mercy, but from something he couldn't name. Something like shame, or recognition. He turned, walked away into the trees, clutching his wound like pride. When it was done, when the snow settled and the air stopped shaking, Silas turned to her. "You didn't have to stand there," he whispered. She looked at him. "I wasn't standing. I was choosing." The next days were quieter. The town didn't say much, but doors that had once stayed closed now opened. Folks nodded in passing. Someone left bread on their porch. Someone else brought nails to fix the fence. No grand apologies. Just the kind of small gestures that build bridges stronger than words. Silas finished the sparrow, sanded it smooth, painted it soft brown, and left it on her windowsill. Etta planted spring seeds in the thawing dirt. They didn't speak of the day on the hill. Some things didn't need repeating. The echo was enough. One morning, weeks later, Etta stood on the porch, sun warming her shoulders. She looked at the horizon. There was still dust there. Still the memory of roads not taken. But she didn't need them anymore. Silas came up behind her. "You think it's over?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I think we're beginning." He nodded. "Good. I'm better at beginnings." They didn't kiss. Not then. They just stood side by side, rooted, alive, and beneath them, the hill held its silence. no longer heavy with fear, but soft with memory, and maybe even hope.